Well, welcome to everybody. I appreciate you all being here. I'm very excited for this evening. It's an honor to be here with Mark Anthony, and I thank you for Mark for reaching out and deciding to collaborate and put something like this together because I truly believe it is needed right now. And so, thank you for your friendship and thank you for collaborating. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to this.
Well, thank you, Anthony. I appreciate that. And I know we got some more folks coming in, so if everyone can bear with us for a minute. But I'd like to say something about Anthony. He and I have known each other for years, and we've seen each other work and had, definitely a mutual respect, and we gained a friendship for each other. And we would do these events at Aquarian Dreams on instead of a church service, it's a circle of light. And so either I would talk or Anthony would talk. Then Anthony would do the sound bowl music, which if you haven't heard them, you really need to. And my dad used to love it. Okay, my dad, he was a Navy SEAL, a NASA engineer. He was getting up in years, and then he passed from cancer, and it was a long, slow decline. And so when putting together a service, I wanted Anthony there to not only speak, which he did beautifully, but he did the most incredible sound bowl concert, and you could feel the vibration from here to the other side. And Anthony, I can never thank you enough for that. So,
That was my
so Anthony and I have been talking. Well, it was my pleasure, and I know Dad loved it. And well, we've been talking for years about getting together and working. And putting together an event. So this is technically our first event. If it hadn't been for the COVID crisis, we'd be doing this in person.
yes.
So thanks to the miracle of modern technology, here we are.
Yes. But it's nice to be together with all of you. Some of you I'm seeing for the first time since I've been back from India, and I appreciate you being here. Um, just a little bit about fear. The Chinese philosopher Chung Tzu said, little fears cause anxiety, but big fears cause panic. And right now, in today's society, we have a lot of reasons to really be afraid. I mean, the world is in a transition, and many of us fear for our health, for our safety. We fear because people are dying. We fear for our jobs. We fear about paying the mortgage, paying bills. Today, I mean, even just going to the food store to go shopping can create a lot of fear and it'd be a stimulus for fear for many of us. Some say there's good reason for this. For they say who knows exactly what next week holds or even tomorrow. In today's society, it's like changing day by day. But this mentality is really leading us deeper into the age of anxiety, which we've been in for a while. We've become a very anxious culture, but this current situation is leading us even further into that because what many people don't realize is that anxiety is a type of fear. It usually has to do with the thought of something going wrong in the future. And that's what creates anxiety for people. So because of this new world we find ourselves in, many people are experiencing something which hasn't really just become a physical health crisis. But what we're in today is causing a deep mental health crisis and creating a lot of fear in society because of fear of the unknown, fear of the future. And the Sufi poet Hafez, he once said that fear is the cheapest room in the house with the worst view. So permit me to show you something more suitable. I would like to see you living in better conditions. And hopefully today, what I will share and Mark will share will help us move out of the cheap rooms into the house, give us some tools to maybe look at the way fear is and have some tools to help work through that, conquer that, especially in this time right now where people called it, a dark time for us. But fear is the cheapest, shabbiest, most uncomfortable place to live. Fear snuffs out the fire of love that's within our heart, and it really also dims the bright light in our eyes. Fear actually thrives in darkness. It thrives on darkness. I mean, think about this. Like if your car broke down on a road at midnight and you're in a desert, a deserted country road somewhere, all of a sudden your mind starts thinking that the woods are haunted. Or, you get a telephone call at 2 a.m. and all of a sudden an alarm in your heart starts going off. Fear gains its strength from darkness and in times of darkness. And fear makes the future our enemy and the unknown our adversary. What if that test comes back positive? What if the company gets bought out or lays off more people? What if the kids, make a mess out of their life? What if the stock market tanks? What if a hurricane, a tornado, or an earthquake comes through? What if the tightness in my chest isn't heartburn? What if, what if, what if? And fear is really the underlying factor for that what if mentality. The dark, cheap room of fear is often filled with the noisy distractions of the what ifs to keep us from paying attention to what's really going on within our hearts and minds. The room of fear seeks to keep us distracted so that we don't have to face what it is that we're afraid of. Anything to keep us from hearing and realizing what is really going on with beneath the surface of our lives. Many of us are afraid to look at that. We're afraid to see that. And fear keeps us from acknowledging what is really underlying certain emotions that arise within us, the difficult things that arise within us. Fear keeps us from shedding the tears of loss and grief, which would come if we would just open up and let them flow. Fear keeps us from tending to the wounds that lie beneath our compulsions, the restlessness, and fear also is the underlying reason for many addictions. We don't want to face certain pains or deal with certain pains. The key, though, is to recognize that getting through the fear is a skill that we can learn. In fact, we have to move through the fear in order to really process it. We are not supposed to be living in fear, but rather, instead, we're supposed to be perfecting our love while we're here in this life, in this incarnation. And any one of the most powerful, and really one of the most powerful ways of conquering fear is the cultivation of love. Because the more love in our lives, the less fear there'll be. Fear and love cannot cohabitate. They can't live together. There's many traditions and philosophies that this is one of their main underlying themes, that you can't have both fear and love within yourself. And as we cultivate more love, fear does begin to diminish. For it is written that there is no fear in love, and perfect love casts out fear. Love has the power to break down the doors that fear has slammed in our faces. Love can break and shatter the really the chains that the chains that fear shackles us with. Love is the light which scatters the darkness of fear. When we can stay centered in love, we don't have to be afraid. But by no means is this easy. It's not easy. The cultivation of love is really the teaching of every tradition, whether it's Jesus or the Jews or Christians or Hindus. The underlying theme of love and compassion is a underlying theme and foundation in all philosophies. But it takes work. It takes effort to do that. And by no means did anyone say this is an easy road. But some tools which can be helpful. Now, my background, for those of you who might not know me on the Zoom, prior to becoming a meditation teacher, my background was medicine. But what I'm going to share right now are some tools from the meditative, contemplative traditions that can help us overcome fear. And then I'm going to turn it over to Mark, and then we'll end with a short meditation at the end. But some tools that can help us with fear is, one, the awareness of it. We need to begin to recognize, in order to begin to conquer fear, we need to recognize and be aware of fears that arise and create havoc in our life. It's easy to get so attached to our thoughts and the feelings that we think we are. We are not our thoughts. We are not our fears. And the feelings that we think, by identifying with these feelings of fear, we're actually moving further away from our truth, which is not fear, which is love. So you are not your thoughts, you are not your fears. You are the awareness, the consciousness in which these thoughts and feelings are arising. So you could watch like an observer every emotion that arises within you, every thought that arises within you, but that takes dedication and practice to do that. But also identifying, getting specific with what it is you are really afraid of. Make a list of the fears that you are aware of. Pay attention to the pictures, the stories that you have in your head. What's happening in them? What are you really scared of? And become, again, the observer of your inner space. The last thing that I will say before handing it over to Mark is that it's also very helpful to label the fears, to name it in some way, but not by saying like I am afraid. We attach ourselves to fear in that way, but just by labeling it softly fear, or fear is arising. And what that does is it allows us to look at it with a sense of spaciousness, which is what I'll be guiding us in the meditation at the end. But also when fear arises, notice what it does to the body, notice what it does to your breath, notice how long it lasts and what thoughts or images arise with that. Of course, when we work with the fearful mind, we initially become more afraid. However, at some point, if we open our eyes and our hearts to the fearful mind and just label fear when it arises, fear, 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 the energy eventually begins to move through us and we can create a shift. We can create a shift by becoming familiar with the fear and say, oh, that's just the fearful mind showing itself again. Thank you for coming. I know why you're here. Eventually, we begin to recognize that fear isn't trying to destroy us. The fearful mind is arising because it's trying to keep us safe. But we need to work through that. And so now let me just hand it over to Mark.
Thank you, Anthony. I appreciate that. And as usual, it was beautiful.
Thank you.
And when talking about fear, fear can consume our lives, and it can block the light, as Anthony explained. And how many of us have heard someone say, "I believe if I could only see a miracle"? But then again, have you ever seen the sunrise? Have you ever seen a seed planted grow into a tree? What about seeing the birth of a baby? Aren't these miracles? And we may not think they are because they're the ones that we take for granted. And miracles come in many forms. The truth is, every day that you're alive is a miracle, even though many days it may not feel that way. And this is especially true during the COVID 19 coronavirus pandemic. It is very easy these days not to feel that miracles exist because we're engulfed in fear. According to modern neuroscience, our brain is actually hardwired for fear. In other words, fear is an instinctive thing. And as Anthony touched on, that's not always a bad thing. For example, having a healthy fear of sticking your hand into a roaring fire is actually a good thing. But on the other hand, fear can be so overwhelming that it fills you with dread, clouds your thinking, and it cripples you emotionally, mentally, physically, and spiritually. People fear the unknown. Why? Because we can't control the unknown and we're afraid of what we do not understand because there's no expectations in it. Fear drains our stability, our security, our expectations. And during this COVID 19 pandemic, we are faced with so many unknown factors beyond our control. Millions of Americans are out of work and they're wondering when and if the next paycheck will come. We haven't seen unemployment like this since the Great Depression. And I remember the stories that my parents told me when they were very small children living in the Depression. And the story that my grandmother used to tell me about the soup kitchens and the lines of people and how everyone was out of work. And my mother said that she thought they were rich because they actually had a bathroom inside their house. Then think about being in quarantine. It makes us feel closed in and even trapped. Social isolation compounds depression and feelings of loneliness. Suicide hotlines are working overtime. Depression is up, alcoholism is, and drug abuse is being compounded. And now, with states opening up, many people fear that our leaders are moving too quickly. And because of that, this plague will spread even more. It's been said that every generation has its war, and that every war is different than the ones that come before it. This is our generation's war. Our enemy is different. This war is different because the enemy is a disease, an insidious and highly contagious virus which is spreading like wildfire throughout our country and the world. This war is also different because it's not being fought by soldiers, but by healthcare professionals. They're the heroes on the front lines. But what we saw in New York City, and now we're seeing in Boston and Detroit, the stress and strain upon these people is immense. Unlike humans, this disease doesn't discriminate. It strikes down people of all ages, races, ethnic backgrounds, and creeds. It shows absolutely no mercy. As the death toll rises and there's no cure in sight, how can anyone possibly believe in miracles? When I was thinking about how I was going to present this to all of you, it dawned on me that not all miracles involve a bright light. And that's when I remembered meeting Anita. I was a teenager when I met Anita. She was an elderly English woman. For those of you who've ever seen Downton Abbey or aware of the actress Maggie Smith, when I think of Anita, that's how I remember her. She was this elderly, stately, very genteel, proper English woman. And I was a 16-year-old high school student and a big time history buff. And in our conversation, it came up that she had lived through the London Air Blitz. So I was thrilled to be able to talk to somebody who'd actually lived through the Battle of Britain. And I remember saying, "So Anita, what was it like?" And I was so excited. And she looked at me and she goes, "Mark, 1940 was an absolutely dreadful year. France had just been crushed by the German army. And on the wireless, on the BBC, we heard one of the French generals say on the radio that now Britain will have her neck wrung like a dead chicken in 2 weeks. And we kept hearing in the BBC that only a miracle could save us." And I was going, wow, that must have really been scary. And Anita looked at me and she said, "Scary is an understatement." Then the bombers came. Every day for 4 months, the German Luftwaffe bombed London. It was relentless. And I remember her putting her hands to her temples and rubbing them. And she said, "No matter how hard I try, I simply can't get the sound of those dive bombers out of my mind." She said that the Germans put loudspeakers on the wings of their dive bombers so that when they would go into a dive, they made this horrid screeching sound like this. And she started imitating it like this, like that. And I was all excited to hear this. And I said, "Well, I've read about that. Those were designed to scare people." Anita looked up at me and said, "They did more than that, Mark. They killed people." Well, for once, my teenage self was completely at a loss for words. And she continued. She said, "It was terrifying, Mark. We never knew what was coming next. One day, I went to work and it wasn't there. I was only 18 years old and I couldn't believe it. The place where I worked had been bombed. Another day, I went home and it wasn't there. I will never forget my mother in tears as our house smoldered in ashes to the ground. Thank goodness mom had been detained at work and got home late because it was a direct hit. She would have been killed." She said, "My dad had been conscripted into the Royal Navy. We were alone. He was somewhere at sea. We didn't know if he was alive or dead one day from the next." Needless to say, Anita had my attention. "The bombings, Mark, were just dreadful. We'd scurry for shelter into the tubes," she said, "subways, as you Americans call them. Or if we were at home or at work, we'd have to run to the nearest basement." She said, "And then the bombs fell. The explosions rattled and shook everything as we huddled together, even with perfect strangers." And she said, not very English, mind you, being tactile with a stranger. I'll never forget her sense of humor. And then she said, "And the explosions rocked the ground and the ceilings, and we were terrified, praying that the ceilings wouldn't collapse on us and that we'd be buried alive." I said, "My God, that must have been terrifying." She was terrifying isn't the word, but it was even worse when the lights went out and then darkness would descend as we sat in the tubes and we'd wait and wait and wait in total darkness underground. sometimes for hours, never knowing if it truly had stopped or if it was safe to go out again. And I remember her staring off into space, and I could see memories flooding through her mind. And I said, "You need it. It's okay if you don't want to go on." She looked at me and she said, "That's quite all right, Mark. I have to tell you this." She said, "I never had friends like I did then. I can still see their faces. We were comrades in arms, bonded together, lofty, lofty." She kept repeating lofty, and a single tear went down her cheek. And I said, "Well, I don't understand. What's lofty?" Lofty was a young man I was rather fond of. He was very thin and very tall. That's why we called him Lofty. And he lived in a flat near me, and he died one day when his building was bombed. They never found his body. Hell of a nice guy, Lofty was. Mark, I lost so many friends, and although it was years ago, the pain feels like yesterday. I often think of happier times before the war. We'd meet at a pub for a pint. Sometimes we'd meet for tea. It was so routine. I guess we didn't realize how good we had it before the war and how happy we were just in the simple things we took for granted. I said, "Anita, how could you even want to go on? How did you cope?" "Stiff upper lip." I said, "What?" "Stiff upper lip." And she lit up. She lit up like a Christmas tree. I said, I don't understand." She said, "Stiff upper lip, Mark. A crisis is no time to fall apart. Being brave isn't about being fearless. I was scared all the time. We all were. Terrified, in fact. I never thought I'd survive those dark days, but I did." "Well, how?" She said, "Mark, it was a miracle, but not in the way that you might think. The miracle I discovered was that I was a lot stronger than I ever knew. And we, banded together, jolly well weren't surrendering to the disease that was Adolf Hitler. The amazing thing is, we all started feeling that way. We were scared to death, but we weren't going to give up." And I was puzzled because, I was thinking, miracles involve walking on water or fishes and loaves. And I said, "Then do you feel that was a miracle?" She said, "It most certainly was. The miracle, Mark, is that we all accepted we were in a crisis together, and falling apart wasn't an option. We had to rise to the occasion, make sacrifices, do whatever was necessary. Something inside of me emerged, and I realized to survive, I had to adapt." I was like, "Wow, that's amazing." And she told me that a miracle occurs when you know you must believe in yourself and you believe in something greater than yourself, that we were all in this together. And that made me realize the miracle was how connected we all were. A miracle occurred because we had no other choice than to put one foot before the other and trudge on no matter what. And she said, and with Mr. Churchill on the wireless, inspiring us that no matter how impossible it seemed, we were going to survive and win. And when we did, Mark, that was our miracle. You know, I get emotional when I think about this. Anita's long gone, at least from this world. And after that conversation, I never saw her again, but her words have stayed with me my entire life. Looking back now, I realize it wasn't a chance meeting because nothing in life is a coincidence. Everything happens for a reason, whether we understand the full impact of it at the time or not. And while we must never take consolation in the suffering of others, sometimes the pain and misfortune of others gives us perspective about our own difficulties. Not for one moment do I downplay the hardships anyone's going through. But we're not being bombed on a daily basis, much less are we being asked to storm the beaches of Normandy or Okinawa. We're being asked to stay home and watch Netflix. And yes, all of us are facing financial hardship, but if history has taught us anything, it's that bad times come to an end. Pandemics come, they're devastating, but eventually they come to an end, and all things must pass. I have to admit, though, many days I don't feel so brave. and I feel crushed under the burden of grief and the burden of life. Yet Mother Teresa once said, God never gives me more than I can handle. I just wish God didn't trust me so much. And maybe that's why I met Anita, to show me that there's a lot we can learn from those terrified Londoners huddled together in basements and subway tubes during relentless air raids and bombings, terrified in total darkness. The truth is, they were just ordinary people like you and me. And in those terrifying days, they discovered a miracle, an inner strength they didn't even know they had, which enabled them to find the confidence to feel that no matter what, they would survive. The odds were against them, but miraculously they survived and even won. Because being heroic doesn't mean being fearless. It means miracles exist and they surround you every minute of every day, and every moment that you are alive. Remember, you are the miracle.
Thank you. That was beautiful, Mark. Thank you for sharing that story with us. And now we're just going to close this part with a very brief meditation on working with fear and dealing with fear. Fear is a natural emotion, it's one of our most powerful emotions. It has a very strong effect on our body and mind. And although many of us are conditioned by fear, for the most part, we've avoided directly exploring its nature. And so this meditation is going to invite us to explore fear and show us how we can work with it, or any really difficult emotion that arises, by just giving it some space, allowing it some, not constricting around it, but actually opening it up. Befriending fear becomes a gateway to freedom. It's an invitation to live more fully with trust and love. It's just a question, really, of who and what is fear arising to? Is it taking us over? Or can we shift to that larger perspective and give the emotion some space to arise? If we can let the fear arise with a spacious awareness, it actually loses its strength. It's like taking a teaspoon of salt and dumping it in a glass of water. If you drink the water, it's very salty. That would be constricting around the fear. But if we take that teaspoon of salt and throw it in a freshwater lake and take a sip, we won't taste the saltiness. So we want to give fear, we want to give difficult emotions some freedom or space to arise within us. So let's begin. I invite you to sit comfortably in any posture that's, comfortable and relaxed for you. Allow yourself to settle into this space in this moment. Let's begin by taking a couple of deep breaths into our belly and then breathing out fully. Let's take another deep, full breath in. And when you exhale out, just let it go. You could even sigh your breath out. And just allow yourself to be here now with whatever is, just as this moment is. And if your eyes aren't closed, I invite you to do so. Closed eyes will help to turn your senses inwards and connect you to your feelings more fully. Now I invite you to just silently say to yourself, or just feel what I'm about to say within yourself for just about 30 seconds. I am afraid. I am afraid. And just feel what this is like when you identify with the fear and say, I am afraid. And now, having felt this for maybe even a second, I would just like you to begin to make a slight shift. And now notice what it feels like when you silently say to yourself, I feel fear. I feel fear. And see how it feels for you to make that shift from saying, I am afraid, to I feel fear. You may notice a difference in how it's actually feeling for you. Experience the shift, experience this new relationship of moving from the I am and attaching to the fear to the I feel. And now let us shift again by silently saying to yourself, I am aware of feeling fear. I am aware of feeling fear. And now fully feel this shift in the relationship. You have moved away from the I am, moved to the I feel, but now you're shifting even further into the observing awareness. I am aware of feeling fear. Notice the different quality that comes from shifting who and what fear is appearing to. So shifting again as this awareness. Step into this awareness, be the awareness, the observer itself, and now say to yourself silently, fear is welcome. Identify with the awareness itself in which the fear is arising. And if you can, you'll notice that the awareness itself is actually not afraid. The fear energy is just arising within the awareness. So identify with the awareness. And just feel the difference of this new relationship. And just noticing this feeling from the ocean of awareness, this feeling arising within the awareness itself. Notice that the awareness has this feeling of an open-heartedness, a spaciousness. And just notice how you feel as you shifted through all those statements. First starting with the I am and the attachment to it, and moving out to the spacious, open-hearted awareness that says, I am aware of this feeling that is arising. And now just take a long, deep breath in, slowly exhale out, and whenever you feel ready, open your eyes and bring yourself back into the space. But that's just a quick meditation for a little tool that you can work with by moving away from the main problem is identifying with these energies that arise within us and moving away to a spaciousness and allowing the energies to just arise and pass through you. I thank you all for joining us today. I know this is short. We could talk about fear for hours, but we are limited with our time on this platform. So I just do want to say from the bottom of my heart, I appreciate you all being here. Mark, I thank you so much for asking me to do this with you, and I look forward to more in the future.
We will. And everybody, please be on the lookout for both Anthony's website, my website, our Facebook pages. Visit our sites, sign up for our newsletters because we're going to be doing a whole series of these. Because during this COVID pandemic, let's take advantage of our miraculous technology to be interconnected.
Yes. It's a wonderful way to socially connect instead of socially distance. But I truly
Love you both.
oh no, thank you.
Love you both.
Love you. Thank you all.